Ayushi Varma van de Benares Hindu University, die vertoeft er momenteel in Suriname voor het doen van onderzoek naar de dalits, vooral in de periode van de Hindostaanse immigratie en met name de komst van de dalits, en dat zijn de allerlaagste van de hindoekasten, tijdens de Hindostaanse immigratie, vooral in de periode van 1830 tot 1920. Ze zal er 8 weken vertoeven in Suriname voor onderzoek en op 13 juni heeft zij dan in het Nationaal Archief Suriname het een en ander gepresenteerd over de dalits. Dit werd georganiseerd door het Nationaal Archief Suriname in samenwerking met de studierichting Geschiedenis van de Anton de Kom Universiteit van Suriname en de stichting OHM.
Olies of the Empire, een fantastisch boek. Waarom fantastisch? Omdat het over verschillende landen schrijft en een van de weinige boeken waarin Suriname voldoende aan bod komt in een Engels geschreven boek. En ik heb haar leren kennen en als je toos vertelde me van hij heeft een aantal PD-studenten die over Caribisch gebied studie doen. Veel Indiërs willen vooral Indische Oceaan en de Pacific over Fiji. En daaronder was deze jonge dame die zei ik ben geïnteresseerd in Suriname. Maar ik zei ken je Nederlands? Nee. Dan hoe kan je over Suriname schrijven? Ze heeft uiteindelijk gekozen om een zeer gewaagd onderwerp over de dalits. Dalits zijn de onaanraakbaren, de laagste kasten, die zelfs buiten het kastensysteem in het verleden waren gelaten. Wij praten over contractarbeiders in het algemeen, waarin alle kasten er waren, maar haar belangstelling, geïnspireerd door professor Ganesh om over de dalits te gaan schrijven en dan niet in India, maar in die verschillende bestemmingslanden. Mauritius, Trinidad, Suriname, Guyana, dan hebben we gehad. En nu zit ze hier. Ik heb toen aangeboden, als je Suriname wil doen, mag je komen en al blijf je 3 maanden, je mag gratis bij mij thuis blijven. Om dat onderzoek te doen. Omdat er buitenlanders soms komen voor een paar dagen en dan zijn ze experts geworden. Zij blijft 8 weken en ze is nu elke dag hier bezig. En ze is zo geïnspireerd geraakt dat ze nu bezig is Nederlands te leren. Want ze moet die bronnen moet ze kunnen verstaan. En ze doet heel goed werk. En ik kan u verzekeren dat vanuit het immigratiedepartement, ik ben zelf bijna 40 jaar bezig. En ze is nu bezig een aantal bronnen van immigratiedepartement te gebruiken die ik nog niet heb gebruikt zelf. Dan mag u weten, het is een geweldige bijdrage die ze gaat leveren.
The title of my paper is Dalits Under the Indentured Labor System, 1830s to 1920s. So, 19th century was a century of mass migration. While much of this movement occurred within Europe, it also involved the forced transportation of African slaves to the Americas. It was also during this time that we saw the abolition of the abhorrent practice of slavery. In 1833, due to pressure from English anti-slavery demonstrators, the British government outlawed this practice from its empire, but it still continued in France and Netherlands for several more decades. This outlawing led to a shortage of labor on the British Empire's capitalist productions that had depended on enslaved workers for centuries. In response, a new form of migration began, one that would shape the development of many countries all over the world, that is the indentured labor system. So to mitigate the problem of labor shortage, Hunter Arbuthnot and Company of Mauritius looked towards India, and in August 1834, they first hired 39 Indian laborers for a period of 5 years under an agreement. The Mauritian experiment ultimately led to the widespread use of indentured labor by other sugar-producing colonies. The Dutch government, however, abolished slavery only in 1860, which was followed by 10 years of apprenticeship for the ex-slaves. The official agreement for Indian emigration to the Dutch colony of Suriname was signed on 8 September 1870, but was not finally ratified until 17 February 1872. The first ship to arrive in Suriname with 410 emigrants was the La Rook in June 1873. 7 more ships followed the same season, but the first year proved disastrous with an 18% mortality rate among migrants within the first 12 months of their landing. Consequently, emigration was paused in June 1874. But while these were the reasons that enabled the plantation colonies to begin recruiting Indians, what were the reasons that Indians themselves had for migrating? So the culture of migration in India was an old one, dating as early as 15th century. Historian D.H.A. Kolff has talked about this tradition of peasants to get recruited as soldiers of the Sultanate. Coming from eastern Hindustan, these soldiers were known as Purabiyas. Going forward, during the British rule, these Purabiyas continued to serve in the British Army. And so the tradition of migration continued, although this was mostly internal. With the arrival of British rule, this internal migration also extended overseas. But what made this overseas migration so widespread? In the context of 19th century North India, the area and time period of my research. Many historians before me have discussed in detail the push factors, which included but were not limited to uneconomic land holdings, deaths, famines, mutiny of 1857, deindustrialization policy, and the permanent land revenue settlement system. So it was due to such British economic policies that thousands of villagers lost their traditional livelihood. These reasons help us understand why people who had land or jobs might have left. But what about those who never had a steady job to begin with, or who faced systemic oppression even when they worked hard? It is in this context that my research looks at the condition of the lower castes, the dalits or the so-called untouchables, who are known in Hindi as achut or asprishya. The origins of the term dalit are quite debatable, although the literal meaning of the term can be easily found in the Sanskrit to English dictionaries of 1890s. Eleanor Zelliot explains that etymologically the Marathi word dalit is derived from the Sanskrit root word dal, meaning to crack, fly open, split, and so on. When used as a noun or adjective, it means you're broken, torn, trodden down, crushed, and destroyed. The first use of the term can be traced back to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar in Bahishkrit Bharat magazine on 7th December 1928. As a side note, I would like to give an introduction to Dr. Ambedkar because I was told that you're not aware of who Dr. Ambedkar is. So B.R. Ambedkar was a jurist, he was an economist, and he was the chief architect of the Indian Constitution. It was due to his unwavering attempts that Indian Constitution gave Dalits the right of reservation, and also there is some kind of protection backing to them. However, by the end of his life, he became so disillusioned with Hinduism that he, along with 300,000 followers, they converted to Buddhism as a response to, as a rejection of caste-based oppression. Okay, coming back, British colonial census takers first consolidated all the communities considered polluted and called them untouchables, and from 1936 onwards, they were called scheduled castes. Most untouchable castes today adopt the term Dalit as an identity of assertion. For the purpose of this paper, the castes that have been classified as untouchables or Dalits are the ones listed under the scheduled caste category of the Government of India's Scheduled Caste Order of 1936. Simultaneously, I also refer to the works of colonial ethnographers like William Crook, Blunt, Risley, Briggs, and others. Here on this slide, you can see a classification of castes based on the occupation from the works of William Crook, who was a magistrate and collector of various districts in northwestern provinces and Awadh during the 1870s and 80s. So while the people at the bottom at the bottom they can be economically or socially bottom, they felt the heaviest weight of changes in the 19th century economy. My focus is on the lower castes, as almost all of them were already landless laborers and daily wage earners. Even if they had land holdings, these holdings were too small for their survival, and in many cases they would be taken up by the dominant caste because of exactions placed upon them. In Bihar, there existed a system known as Kamiyaiti system, in which poor people sold their services and sometimes those of their children in years to come just to obtain resources for their subsistence. Historian Gyan Prakash in his book Bonded Histories shows that these kamiyas were mainly coming from the untouchable caste of bhuiyas. Here I want to make a clarification between two similar sounding castes. One is bhuihar. They are landowners and agriculturalists, also known as babans, and you will find them under the heading military and dominant. And the other is bhuiyas, who are under the forest and hill tribes categories, these. It is these bhuiyars who would form the kamiyas predominantly in Bihar. Prakash defines the Kamiyaiti system as one of slavery. Yeah. So this is a picture of a person from that untouchable community, Bhuiyar, and you can notice how they are bare feet, they don't have any clothes on their chest. And so the Kamiyaiti system was not an isolated case. In other parts of North India, similar forms of bonded labor existed. Other such system was the Savak system. In the Gazetteer of Province of Awadh for 1877, it has been described as one under which a man belonging to the lower castes of Lodh, Chamar, Kori and Kurmi would receive an advance from a farmer and become his bond serf for life. For this, a man binds himself and his children down till the remotest generation until the debt is paid. It is noted in the Gazetteer, and I quote, that they are to a certain extent in the position of a slave plowman. In the district of Gonda, it was described that even though in Diksar Pargana, 1/3 of the whole population consists of the two higher castes of Brahmins and Thakurs, the majority of them being old village proprietors, they would not even touch a plough, and they subsist either on the rents they receive from the other caste or, quote, produce of slave labor in the fields they call their own. So there were approximately 10,000 Koris in that town, and almost all of them were engaged as Savaks. And these Savaks, they received only minimum clothing and food, only as much that would enable them to work on the fields of their masters. It is described that in moments of crisis like famine, this Savak laborer is turned away by the Faizabad farmer. And the colonial ethnographer equates this to the metaphor of just as the governor of a besieged city sends out all the non-combatants. This metaphor shows the utter precarity of the lives of people coming from the untouchable castes. For such oppressed individuals as the Kamiyas and the Savaks, systems that have been equated to slavery, they would have been better off engaging themselves as indentured, a form of servitude which may seem light compared to the yoke of the landlord or the moneylender. Having given you the background or the description of their lives as per the colonial ethnographers, now I would like to share a poem that is believed to have been written by an untouchable from the caste called Dome, whose name is Hira. This poem was published in a popular Hindi magazine Saraswati in 1914. You can see some part of it here and its transliterated version. I'm just going to give you an overall gist of it. The poet complains that not even God sees his pain, which is why he will have to go and complain to the Sahib. The Sahib here being the colonial government. He says that whatever we earn, we do so by our own hard work, and that our body is made of the same bones and flesh as that of the Brahmins. Then why is it that they are worshipped and given Jajmani rights while we still have to drink water from the mud? While lamenting about his pitiful condition, the poet highlights the deep injustice and inequality between the upper and the lower castes. This sense of injustice wasn't just poetic expression, but it reflected a larger social reality that many people lived with daily. It was in such miserable socio-economic conditions that many lower caste people migrated under the indentured labor system. They could have become easy targets, or they could have chosen to migrate on their own. But whether or not their migration was voluntary or coercive, it wouldn't change the social realities they were living in the 19th century. Now we turn to the data on castes from various colonies. In Fiji, historian Bridgelal has found that Brahmins and allied groups formed only 3.71% of Fiji's North Indian migrants. 39.04% of them belong to middling agricultural and artisan castes, and 21.93% belonged to low menial castes. In fact, the very first person who migrated to Fiji under the system was a Chamar whose name was Kashi. Similarly, Surendra Bhana, in his book, has done data analysis on the migrants to Natal. From his data, we can see that Dalits formed 23.7% of the total 35,720 immigrants. The middling caste about 13% and the higher caste about 8%. The data for Suriname has been borrowed from Professor Chunni's work. His data is based on annual reports from 1895 to 1912, and it shows that 17% of the migrants belonged to high caste, while those from middle caste were about 45% by combining the agriculturalist and artisans group together, and 38% from lower caste. Also from the foundational work of de Klerk can be seen an analysis of 4 randomly chosen ships. The conclusive data is that there was about 17% of high caste, middle caste formed 33%, lower and oppressed castes were 31%, and Muslims were about 17%. Looking at the data from various colonies, it is evident that it was not just the lower caste who migrated. This was also clarified by Grierson in his 1883 report, who analyzed the castes of 1,226 immigrants from the registers and concluded that 2/3 of the Hindus recruited were from higher and medium social position, and 1/3 being from decidedly low social position. What is notable is that while there was a caste diversity amongst the indentured population, Dalits always played a significant role in shaping the demographic composition of immigrants to various colonies, which tells you that they migrated in large number. But to really understand their stories, we must now move on to the lives of such Dalit immigrants, looking at their journeys, experiences, and transformations. The major debate, as we are all aware, looking about overseas migration and caste has been that of losing caste by crossing the Kala Pani, that is the black waters of the sea. However, this fear of losing caste was mostly prevalent among non-Dalits. The discussion about those who had no fear of losing caste because they were already outcasts is absent from the historiography. So the questions to be pondered on are, what happened to caste in the process of migration? How did Girmitiyas adapt to a new environment where caste was not considered? Was caste consciousness weakened as the plantation colonies did not allow to reinforce it? And did it result in any sort of upward mobility? These are the some questions that I will now explore in the second part of my presentation. So in this paper, I have used evidence from colonial reports and ethnographic writings, but the most important primary evidences are the works that are written by indentured laborers themselves. One, that of Munshi Rahman Khan and Totaram Sanadia. Their writings provide first-hand insights into the experiences of indenture and reveal how migration affected caste dynamics. So Munshi Rahman Khan came to Suriname in 1898 at the age of 24. He was an educated man who later settled in Suriname, and in 1943 he wrote his autobiography in Hindi called Jeevan Prakash. His work is a personal life history and is filled with rich documentation of the experiences of an Indian immigrant right from the depot to the life on the plantations and even beyond. In his autobiography, he wrote a verse on the social dynamics that emerged among migrants once they reached the Calcutta depot. देश देश के नारी नर ले आयो एक ठाव, मात पिता सुत नारी सब छुड़वाओ निज गांव. अब तक सब कोई थे रहत निज धर्मन अनुसार, कलकत्ता में आयकर दीन धर्म सब डार. नहीं कोई जान सके इन सब में कौन ऊंच अरु नीच, सब है शूद्र समान यहाँ धर्म मिलायो कीच. Which translates to, women and men from across the country have gathered at this common den, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, villages left behind by everyone. Until now, everyone was living as per their own beliefs. But after coming to Calcutta, everyone has dropped their religion. In this mix, none can rightly see who is high or low. All have become Shudras here and mixed their religion in mud. So through this chopai, Khan is suggesting that migration to unfamiliar lands has led to a blending of identities and a leveling of social distinctions. Furthermore, he vividly describes how, after taking a bath, people from different castes shed their distinctive religious symbols, such as tilak, that is the mark worn on the forehead by Hindus, and a kanthimala, which is a sacred necklace. That without these signs, no one could tell who belonged to which caste. He portrays this bath as not just a physical act, but as symbolic of cleansing of caste. Khan notes that we all became equal after taking the bath. Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya all came to the depot as Shudras, emphasizing that the boundaries of caste distinctions were blurred. Another significant aspect highlighted by Khan is the uniformity in clothing provided to everyone. So irrespective of their previous caste affiliations, each individual received the same attire consisting of a yellow kurta, a dhoti, and a red coarse shawl. The shedding of religious symbols and the adoption of uniform clothing signify a departure from the previous caste-based distinctions and the emergence of a more egalitarian social environment. Munshi Rahman Khan further documents how the upper castes do not mind eating with the lower caste in depots, and he writes, "Here, no Brahman or Kshatriya said a word that they will not eat with Muslims, Chamars or Dome, otherwise our religion would spoil." So as a result, the voyage emerged as a casteless space. So while exploitation, excommunication and a prohibition on interdining, intercaste marriages were the social conditions of India in 19th century, in contrast, in the depots and during the voyage, people were eating together and staying in proximity, irrespective of their castes. Moreover, in the colonies, intercaste marriages also became common. Andrews and Pearson note in their 1916 report on indentured labor in Fiji, and I quote them, "Castes and religions were mixed together in a common jumble. Hindu girls were sold in marriage to Mohammedans and vice versa. Sweepers' children were sometimes married to Brahmins." What this mixing of castes and religions in marriage tells us is that social relationships that arose in and after the plantation settings were dynamic and adaptable in nature. Now that the indentured laborers were removed from their native cultural and social contexts, they began forming new connections and alliances which were based on shared experiences and mutual survival in an unfamiliar environment.